First and foremost, I want to express our thanks to Massey College for hosting this event and to Joe and Emily for the amazing tech support. Today marks a significant moment as we announce Journalists for Human Rights' new program in Europe, activating independent Russian and Belarusian journalists to combat information manipulation. And I want to thank the Government of Canada for the partnership on this project. It gives us the opportunity to support independent Russian and Belarusian journalists in exile and to counter Russian and Belarusian false narratives that reach audiences across the world. And a special thanks also to Marcus Kolga, because without you, the project wouldn't be there either. As many of you know, both Russian and Belarusian journalists face massive challenges when it comes to freedom of expression and human rights. Censorship, repressive legislation, violent crackdowns on civil society activists and journalists have become all too common in both countries. Last week, Belarusian authorities threatened families of those in exile. This week, our panelist Hanna Liubakova heard she would be tried at the Minsk Regional Court, along with 19 others, for conspiracy to seize power. These past days in Russia, 3 new arrests have been made, and journalists working for, among others, Reuters, Forbes, are charged with extremism. In Belarus, journalists and activists for democracy have never had a break from one of the most repressive regimes in the world. Torture, punishment of family members, refusal of medical help for political prisoners, forced labor. This is what over 30 journalists and many political activists in Belarus are facing, and more are threatened with. In Russia, journalists, as well as civil society groups such as women's rights and LGBTQ organizations, are firstly designated as foreign agents, then move up the ladder, so to speak, to being undesirable, and finally, they are designated as extremist organizations with all the consequences that has. This means also a total blackout of any free civil dialogue. They are threatened by transnational repression when in exile, and as the persecution does not stop at the borders. Without journalists providing true reporting, audiences are shut off from getting any real information, including and especially also about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Information manipulation infects our democracies, and we cannot stand by. So in responding to these challenges, our project seeks to empower independent journalists, particularly women and LGBTQ journalists, to enhance fact-based reporting on human rights and counter information manipulation. The project embodies our commitment to supporting Russian and Belarusian independent media and civil society. And many journalists and activists have found refuge and friends in Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Poland, among others. It is important that they can continue to do their reporting, their investigations, and their stories, so audiences can be informed. And through collaboration with local partners, diplomatic missions, and allied governments, we will work to make a meaningful impact so they can continue to do their work. And so I want to acknowledge the dedication and bravery of all Belarusian and Russian journalists and activists working tirelessly to uphold human rights and freedom of expression. Your work is invaluable, and we stand with you as we start this project. So now I want to welcome the Ambassador of Lithuania in Canada, Darius Skusevičius, and invite him to speak.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you for allowing me to join this important event. In several days, we will celebrate World Press Freedom Day, and I'm saying very confidently that we will celebrate because we really have a lot to celebrate. We live in societies where almost anyone can become a media channel, speak freely, and most important is say what he or she thinks. Of course, at the same time, we understand that this freedom comes with many challenges, as misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, lies, manipulations, and this is happening in free and democratic societies. Topic of your discussion today is even more complicated in the project you are about to implement. When we speak about neighbors of Lithuania, namely Russia and Belarus, we see very, very challenging environment. People are fighting not only for freedom of speech, but also, unfortunately, for freedom after speech. And for them, it's not no longer impossible to operate from their countries. So many of them found a shelter in Lithuania and neighboring countries. Let me remind some bigger stories in addition to what you've just mentioned, Janine. Diversion of plane flying to Vilnius in Minsk, and repressionist structures taking over the person of their interest, or vocal critic of Kremlin just suddenly dying in one of the prison cells. I'm talking about Alexei Navalny. So this is really, really challenging topic, and I'm so happy that you here in Canada care about those topics and are planning to implement this very important project. Let me just briefly say that Lithuania. Many of them found home in Lithuania, and Lithuania is ready to continue supporting all the civil society activists, independent journalists, NGOs, opposition leaders. We see ourselves as a hub of democracy in our region, and we'll continue to support all those efforts of yours and similar organizations to help the people who really need professional support in advancing their operations from unfortunately from shelters like Lithuania and other countries. So I'm wishing you have a good event, and thank you one more time for inviting me to join you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to invite Bill Killorn, Executive Director for JHR, to start the panel.
All right. Thank you, Janine. And before I introduce our panelists, I just want to say a few thank yous because this event and this project couldn't get underway without the hard work of a lot of people, namely Janine and Marcus. I think that we're here to launch this project today, but the work on this project really began over a year ago, as Janine and Marcus have been really working hard to build relationships with journalists and partners and with Global Affairs Canada to make this project a success. So congratulations to both of you on today's launch. And I know a lot of you in the audience are here because you want to contribute or support the project. I would direct you to Janine and Marcus after the event, and certainly happy to talk to you about that. I also want to thank Massey College for hosting us here today, and of course Global Affairs Canada for supporting the project. And last but not least, our colleague Harris, who is the architect of today's event. This couldn't go on without him, so thank you, Harris. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for today's discussion, beginning with Marcus Kolga. All the people today are very accomplished and they have very impressive bios. I'm going to give a quick summary of them. So, apologies if I leave some things out because this is very impressive bios here for our panelists. Marcus Kolga is a Canadian writer, filmmaker, and human rights activist. He frequently writes and comments on Russia and Central and Eastern European issues and disinformation in Canada and international media. His articles have been published in a variety of international media outlets. Marcus led the Canadian civil society campaign for the Magnitsky human rights sanctions legislation and has led and supported similar efforts in Estonia, Latvia, Sweden, and Australia. He has testified regularly in the UK, US, Australian, and Canadian parliaments about the Magnitsky sanctions, foreign information and influence operations, Interpol reform, and the war in Ukraine. In 2015, he was awarded the Order of the White Star by the Estonian president. In 2021, he received the Latvian Ministry of Defense Medal of Recognition, and in 2022, he was awarded the Medal of Merit Second Class by the Estonian Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is the founder of Disinfo Watch and is a senior fellow at the Donald Laurier Institute, Center for Advancing Canadian Interests Abroad. Thank you, Marcus, for joining us today. I'm glad that I met you before I knew all these impressive accolades. I would have been very intimidated the first time we met. Next, I'd like to bring in Hanna Liubakova. Hanna is a journalist and analyst from Belarus. She is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. She has written about the latest developments in Belarus for the Washington Post and The Economist and other international outlets. She won the 2023 One Young World Journalist of the Year award and was the 2021 European Press Prize finalist. Hanna began her career at the only independent Belarusian channel, Belsat TV, which was banned by the regime in Minsk, and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Hanna, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, we have Sabine Sile. Sabine is a co-founder and the director of sustainability foundations in Latvia, overseeing Media Hub Riga that manages to support local as well as over 270 media workers in exile and 185 family members. She's also a member of the Advisory Council on Media Policy at the Ministry of Culture in Latvia, a board member of the International Civic Forum, and an advisory board member of the Fix Media Foundation. Previously, Sabine was a director at the Center for Media Studies at the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga. Welcome, Sabine.
Hi, thank you for joining.
So we've got an impressive group of panelists here, and we've got a very interesting topic to get into. I think we'll start by just setting the stage and allowing each of you to kind of tell us a little bit about what brings you to this project and a little bit of an intro. So we'll start with Marcus.
Well, thanks so much, Bill, for that kind introduction. And let me just say how thankful I am and honored I am to be working with Journalists for Human Rights on this incredibly important project. I've spent the past 15 years or so advocating and supporting Russian civil society, independent journalists, human rights activists, and other pro-democracy leaders. And through that work, I've been able to work with some pretty amazing people like Boris Nemtsov, who, of course, was a well-known and well-loved Russian pro-democracy opposition leader who was gunned down in front of the Kremlin in 2015. And my dear friend, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who I actually brought to Toronto for the first time in 2009. We were just across the street at Monk at a conference. And that's the first time that I met him. Many of you have probably heard his name since then. Back then, he was a journalist, an independent journalist working for Russian television. He was their New York correspondent. In 2015, because of his work with Boris Nemtsov, he was poisoned, just like Alexei Navalny was. And in 2017, he was poisoned once again. In 2022, when the war broke out, Vladimir had already moved with his family to Washington, and he decided that because of the war, he needed to get back to Russia to speak out against the war and against the regime. And in April of that year, after an appearance on CNN, where he described the sort of situation in Moscow at the time, he was arrested when he returned back to his apartment. And he was, about a month or two later, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And he's been sitting in isolation now for over 10 months. I spoke with his wife just a few weeks ago, who described the conditions that Vladimir is living in. He is in a 5x5 concrete cell. There is no window. There is a steel bed that flips down when it's time to go to sleep, and a small steel stool. He's given a pencil and a piece of paper for 1 hour every single day, and he's allowed to go outside for a walk for about 20 to 30 minutes every single day. The rest of that time, outside of that roughly hour and a half, he is sitting alone, staring at a concrete wall. This is a person who was politically active. He was a civil society leader. He was a journalist. Those sorts of conditions are torture on an individual. And he also has health conditions that stem from his poisonings in 2015 and 2017. He has neuropathy in his feet, and because he's unable to walk, his condition is worsening. There's concern amongst his friends that if those conditions don't improve shortly, that it could lead to a worsening of his condition and ultimately his death, which is maybe something that Vladimir Putin is hoping for, just like he did with Alexei Navalny. So it's important that we all remember Vladimir, the near over 1,000 other Russian political prisoners, many of whom are journalists. And it gives me great pride that Canada has now decided to support this very, very important project. These independent journalists, whether they're in Belarus or Russia, are on the front lines fighting for democracy as authoritarian rule is rising. And certainly in terms of information and influence operations in the Western world and here in Canada. So that's what brings me to this project. And again, I'm awfully proud to be working with this amazing team at JHR on it. And I'm terribly proud of the Canadian government for supporting this project.
Thank you, Marcus. And we're very proud to have you working on this project with us. And I'd like to go to Hanna now. Hanna, we'll turn to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you everyone for coming and for this very important discussion. And thank you to Canada for launching this event, this fund. So when I was preparing for this event, I was thinking whether I should start with something negative or positive. And I will perhaps not give you a choice this time because I will start with the bad thing so that I can finish with something good, something more positive. Let me tell you about 3 events that happened in Belarus in the past several weeks, the events that perhaps some of you may not even heard about. And I promise this is going to be relevant to the discussion and the topic of our conversation. First, April 22, Nastasya Matyash was sentenced to 2 years in prison and a heavy fine of 30,000 euros just because she collaborated with an independent TV channel, Belsat TV, which is based in Poland. I know Nastasya personally. She's one of the best language experts in the country. April 29, journalist Alexander Kornyshow gave an interview to Belsat TV. Because he's in exile, the regime cannot reach him, so police searched his elderly parents' house in Belarus. His father recently had a stroke. April 29 again, the regime classified Deutsche Welle Belarus, the German broadcaster branch in the country, as an extremist organization, leading to a ban of all Deutsche Welle's content across all platforms in Belarus. What an eventful span of several days, isn't it? Belarus became the 3rd largest jailer in the world after China and Myanmar, according to the CPJ. This is perhaps not the competition I'd like to my country to win in, but here we are. Now, based on these real stories, I will tell you about 3 challenges that we are facing in Belarus at the moment. First, it's obviously imprisonment. 36 journalists are currently in jail, and this does not include bloggers, such as my friend Ihor Losik, who was sentenced to 15 years in jail for just posting information about Belarus. Many hundreds actually had to flee, yet arrests continue till this day. There are still journalists in Belarus, but they cannot cover any political, any sensitive topic at the moment. As in an example of Deutsche Welle I mentioned previously, hundreds of media outlets, their social media channels, their other sources of information have been labeled as extremist. What does it actually mean? It sounds very abstract, isn't it? It means that even if a person likes or shares this content, they can be jailed. For us, it means that we cannot get any quote, any source, any nothing from people inside the country. Not many can speak anonymously because in Belarus currently, even anonymity is dangerous because it's a totalitarian state with a really high level of surveillance. Police can stop anyone on the streets and check their phones. For us, it also means that it affects our visibility, our connections with people on the ground, and their trust. And the third challenge I'm going to mention, which is, I guess, my favorite topic, as Janine mentioned, this week I heard that the regional court in Belarus will soon kind of start a trial against me and 19 other prominent journalists and analysts. We face 4 criminal charges. One of them is a conspiracy to seize power, which is punishable by up to 12 years in prison. I'm on the wanted list in Belarus, in Russia, in all CIS countries. And what does it basically mean? Because I'm abroad and I'm safe. Can the regime reach me? Well, they almost did. 3 years ago, when I flew to one of the CIS countries and I wasn't aware about the search warrant back then, I was actually arrested there. And I was almost extradited, but luckily I was sent back to Europe, to the EU. The regime also intimidates my family, and they arrested my family's countryside house in Belarus. You know, it requires a certain degree of self-consciousness to not allow self-censorship to take the lead. But we are still here, we are successful, and we show great outreach, we show great numbers. I will tell you about how we do it, I promise, but I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanna. And now let's go to Sabine and bring Sabine in for some opening remarks.
Hi, thank you, Bill. I wanted to share with you about the work that Media Hub Riga does and the challenges that we face in order to have a better understanding of the consequences of this type of intimidation and physical force used against journalists and their family members. So Media Hub Riga has joined the efforts of several local organizations and in order to provide emergency support for relocation, in order to provide legal support, which is needed when you want to establish a media in a different country, and of course, filing all the immigration papers in a different language, so each person needs the support of a lawyer to fill out and to make sure they get a legal status in another country that is hosting. Additionally, we're providing social and professional integration support. We have video studio and podcast studios, as well as a safe office. But although we never expected, we ended up also providing rehabilitation and medical support because the consequences of working in a hostile environment for a lengthy period of time and then having to flee your home country in a matter of hours with no clear view of the future is very traumatic, and it has left people with a lot of medical conditions, and even people who used to be healthy and never had an issue with their health, we notice it. It's literally 3 weeks after landing in Riga and spending time unpacking their bags, people begin to experience various challenges with their physical and emotional health. These, when I look at the numbers, I don't believe it myself because time seems to have flown by. But since the beginning of the war, of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we have managed to support over 700 media workers. And out of those, 270 are media workers from Russia who are in exile in Latvia. And additionally, there's approximately 185 family members. And the majority of people from the hub are from Russia because we have a border with Russia. We also have several journalists from Belarus, some also from Ukraine, from occupied territories who had to flee, and also journalists from Central Asia, because the sanctions on Russia ultimately have also created a reaction and more pressure on Central Asia, on the freedom of speech, on the journalists that are there. So in the safe office, we have approximately 120 journalists, media workers who regularly use it so that they can support each other, be in a co-working space. The kitchen is a place where we celebrate birthdays and celebrate getting the residency permits. and things like that, and have community events, because over the winter period, when especially being here in the north, we lack sun, and some positive human connection really helps out to get through the darker period of the season. But the reason the NGOs had to get involved in this whole process is because journalists are not a typical refugee. The refugee system that usually every country has, it limits the movement of the person who applies. And for media professionals whose job it is to move around and to be at the center of the events and to report, they would need their ability to fulfill their duties would be limited. So the refugee status also in Latvia doesn't fit for these media workers who are in exile, because some of them do need to go back in order to report, in order to meet with our sources. And of course, it's not possible for those who are under criminal charges already. And oftentimes the introductions we make of the group, that we're quite a colorful group. We're a group of terrorists and foreign agents and all different kind of sorts of charges that have been raised against this community of committed media workers. And so we had to reinvent the support that usually a person would get by filing for refugee status. So we have to provide all the integration support and relocation, and this has caused, of course, challenges for the policy side of EU states in how to provide this emergency support to media workers who also have a need to return every once in a while to Russia. And so every country has the ability to react differently. And in Latvia, it's a political decision in the interest of state to provide this residency permit. But the future is still unclear, because as the war continues, we know that sooner or later people will need a citizenship or stable status, and not just a temporary one. So the policymakers do have a lot on their plate to figure out the best solution for these media workers. And I'm very grateful that you are here also today and this morning. You've gathered to hear about these issues. It's encouraging for us, and we feel supported, although you're very far away. Because sometimes it does get tough, and we have limited sources in order to provide assistance when it is needed. And we try to do as much as we can on our own, but more and more we find that we are limited in what we can provide and how we can assist. And if you get a chance to visit the Baltics, I would definitely encourage you to come and visit us. And for us, it's been a wake-up call as well, because I still remember the time when I was born, when Latvia was part of the Soviet Union, and I remember the atmosphere or the feeling or the limitations of freedom that we experienced as family, and then this beautiful freedom that we get, and oftentimes we don't value it sufficiently or are not grateful enough for it until we lose it. So it really has been a wake-up call for the Baltic states, and the Baltic states have been very active in providing support to Ukraine, because we realized that we could be next. But it's a reality that we're ready to live for, because we realize it's really not a war about a country towards a country. It's a war about values of freedom and democratic values, but even more so, human values. So thank you for joining and for the support that you're providing.
Thank you, Sabine, and thank you, Hanna and Marcus, for really setting the stage of what we're dealing with this project. There are a lot of questions I want to get into about how journalists are operating and disinformation and misinformation. But after hearing the stories, and last month we were in Eastern Europe and met with a lot of journalists in person, Marcus, the number one question that comes to me is, these journalists are facing jail, harassment, online and in person, attacks, violence, even stronger in some cases. And you've all articulated some of the other challenges, mental health challenges, pressures. Hanna, yourself are facing criminal cases. The question that keeps coming to me is, despite all of these challenges, what motivates the journalists to continue this fight, to continue to be on the front lines for free expression, for media freedom, for democracy? Hanna, perhaps we can start with you, because you yourself are in the midst of an ongoing criminal case in Belarus. What motivates you to keep fighting?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I'm finally getting back to something more positive. This is usually the role I like much better than talking about challenges. First of all, we are effective. I probably mention 3 examples. I usually mention 3 things because I think it's easier for the brain. So first of all, we continue operating. No media outlet got shut down after they had to relocate since 2020, the revolution that we had in Belarus. They did not become Polish, Lithuanian, Georgian, or any other outlet. They are Belarusian, and their priority audience is the Belarusian audience, which is very interesting because we have to focus now on those people inside the country, in those diasporas who are outside the country. And it's not an easy task when you have your audiences spread between like 4, 5, 10 countries. Which is even more important is to focus on those who are inside the country, because they are often undercover. They are often the audience that does not have any other access to free, unbiased, independent information because of censorship, because of blackout, and all the bans that the regime imposed on independent media. But as an example, some of the largest media outlets with which I work as a consultant have at least 80% of their audiences inside Belarus. Believe me, this is a really huge number, given, again, all the censorship of the regime. They are doing this via mirrors, via VPNs, via other means. By the way, the Canadian company Siphon had a great offer for Belarusian media previously. I hope this is going to come back. We still get tips and hints from those inside Belarus. One of the outlets with which I collaborate has at least 30% of their content being sort of received from people inside the country. Of course, they have to verify it, they have to anonymize it, and then only after that they publish it. But it helps maintain this connection with people on the ground and helps kind of keep the content relevant for people inside the country. Because of this, walls, because of this distance, this is a really, really hard issue and really important to do. We also use social media. This is how we reach audiences inside Belarus, and they watch us. YouTube became now like alternative television. Many of those who are left only with propaganda, with state media, turn to YouTube, and this is the platform where they get information from. And propaganda the regime cannot do much about this. Of course, they can censor it, as they did previously during the New Year's address of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, president-elect. They kind of censored YouTube. They turned it off for like 10 minutes when she was speaking, and YouTube was not available in Belarus. But otherwise, it's kind of expensive, to turn it off completely. The regime doesn't do it yet. And of course, we use TikTok. TikTok is one of the fastest growing social media platforms in Belarus. Of course, we know about all the repercussions and the country that owns it, this platform. But for now, it's effective. For now, it works. Even the regime uses it for its own purposes. But it's very weird how they use it. They are not successful there yet. We also use self-made newspapers. We have thousands of this sort of circulation every week, and people need it. So I think this kind of understanding that people need us and people read us and people still need this information. Even those people who are neutral, as we call them, who don't normally read political news, they're still hungry for information. This is very important. The second thing why we do what we do is because, I don't want to sound pompous, but it's very important. Our friends are in jail. I mentioned 36 only journalists in jail, not to mention bloggers. And this is our task, to give the voice to the voiceless, as pompous as it sounds. And I think the third reason why we do what we do is because I see my country in danger right now. The independence and sovereignty of Belarus is being affected by Russia. And I don't want this to happen. My high school was shut down by the regime when I was 14. And I've been fighting. I've been opposing the regime since then. And I really want to see my country democratic, and I really want to go back home.
Thank you, Hanna. And you're right, that was kind of more on the inspiring side. And we feel very lucky to have you as a part of this project, and are grateful for your input as we've been developing it. Sabine, maybe we can go to you. I know the Media Hub supports a lot of journalists that have been displaced from various countries, as you've articulated. What do you think is their motivation to continue despite all the obstacles?
Already more than 10 years ago, when we started providing training programs for media managers from Russia, over the years, it was evident that they've been living in hostile environment and working in hostile environment for quite some time, and the threats were increasing. At the same time, there is this sense of survival that you continue with your work. You've invested so much in it's a mission that people want to fulfill and work for. And as Hanna said, a belief that they want to see Russia as a democratic country, and they want to experience this sense of justice and liberty in their own communities. And that hope has faded in many ways, but I think it is our job from other democratic countries, be it small or big, to support them in their dream. And even when a lot of things around them try to take away their dream or their hope for the future, I think even at those moments, it is very crucial that we stand together and support them. I mean, all through their working lives, they've been told that their voice doesn't matter, their work doesn't matter, because things keep falling apart when the country is ruled by criminals. And with elections, no matter how you vote, it's still the same president. And there is this sense of unfairness, injustice, and mistreatment, but also sometimes what they've said when they've arrived here, and when we are grateful and thank them for their work, they say that they said, "Thank you. I didn't realize that my work mattered." And during these times of uncertainty for them, it is very important that we really support them and are with them, encourage them. They do a lot of the work themselves. They're very driven, as any kind of community in exile. There are a lot of startups. There are new initiatives. Really, there's no way of going back for many of them. So you have to go forward. And they've been an encouragement to us locals, and to me as a Latvian, to see that despite, if your country takes away your voice or your home, or intimidates your parents and you are forced to flee, nobody can take away really your inner strength, your inner belief in goodness and justice, in a better future. So I've seen them as very driven, and I don't know if it's just out of matter of survival, but it's a very strong belief, and that belief cannot be taken away lightly. I mean, it's very valuable.
And Marcus, maybe I'll rephrase the question for you. As a Canadian, someone based in Canada, what motivates you to combat mis and disinformation coming out of Russia?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, why is this project at all important to Canadians? Well, I mean, we've seen over the past number of years how the Kremlin and other foreign authoritarian regimes have tried to challenge the sovereignty of our own democracy, of our own information spaces. And when I'm speaking on these issues, I often get asked the question, how do we defend our democracy against this? I mean, we're doing a lot of things. We've set up various different institutions within our government to defend against foreign information operations. The RRM at Global Affairs is one of those important pillars that's doing this work. But it also means that we need to go on the offensive. Truth and facts are toxic to these authoritarian regimes. That's why they've largely criminalized the journalists that do work in the independent journalists who are trying to bring facts and truth to audiences in Belarus and in Russia. And so I think it's critically important as Canadians that we step up this fight and support those journalists, the brave and courageous ones who are putting, let's be honest, their lives on the line to defend and advance democratic values in their own countries. That's people like Hanna, all of her colleagues, the work that Sabine is doing to support those Russian independent journalists. It's quite frankly in our own national self-interest to be doing this work, because if we can push these authoritarians to be on their back foot, on the defensive, that's how we'll do it, is through promoting truth and facts through these brave frontline soldiers who are defending and promoting democracy.
Thank you. I want to pick up on that point you said about truth and facts, because this project that we're launching today is about mis and disinformation and combating that through strong independent journalism. I'm wondering this kind of question for everybody. When it comes to truth and facts, how important is that in the work you do in educating the audiences that you're reaching? And also, how does that relate to a strong democracy? Sabine, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, although it's hard to break through and report from exile, you are relying on sources that you had, and it's a challenge to build new sources. But obviously, journalists are effective because the repressions continue even after they go and after they flee. And what we've seen also globally over the last years with all the leaks and the Panama Papers, and we see that as crime has become global, it is oftentimes journalists, investigative journalists, that are the most effective in dealing and revealing, uncovering these crimes and corruption, because journalists are not limited like police or state institutions by geographical boundaries. And this is a hopeful message indeed, because, it's so vital to remember that there wouldn't be repressions against journalists if they weren't effective, if what they were doing wasn't hurting the regimes that are using criminal tools to just maintain power and money. And the ways and means they go to intimidate the exile community, activists, journalists, opposition leaders, it shows that they are desperate, that it is intimidating. And but also why it is important for Canada and also for Latvia, because the way the information war has happened was that it's basically sowing seeds of doubt and division in our countries. We do have a homework to work on, inequality, and what we've seen that misinformation works mostly on the communities that are disenfranchised. So in our own democracies, we do have weak spots where we do have challenges that we need to address. And however, we do need to stand together and remember that really for Russia, they need to create this outer foreign enemy in order to maintain power. And it's easier to control people who are fearful. And that's why we are very mindful in how we live and how we work to keep the fear away and remind ourselves that there's lots we can do on our own, and that our voice matters, our work matters, and supporting each other matters.
Same question. How important is combating mis and disinformation to the audience that you're reaching in Belarus?
Oh, it's very important. There is a quote that I like and I find really crucial. The war is not merely a task for tanks, but it's also a war for people's minds. I'm very now liberal in how I quote it. I believe that in defending values, democratic values, we must not only fight against disinformation and misinformation, but also champion the truth. So I want to take this question a little bit further. And let me give you 3 facts about Belarusian society, which is often ignored, which is often overlooked in the decisions that foreign governments take. First fact is the absolute majority of Belarusians is against any involvement of Belarus in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is according to the Chatham House, that was public research, and this hasn't changed since 2022. The same numbers, similar numbers, are also visible in other reports which were not public. The second fact is the majority of Belarusians is against attacks and shelling of Ukraine from Belarus, from the territory of Belarus. And the third fact is that the majority of Belarusians is against Russian nuclear weapons. Does it prevent the regime of Belarus from doing what it's doing? Well, of course, repression did not stop. They only escalated. The regime of Belarus became a co-aggressor in the invasion. Yet, we know that Lukashenko has not sent Belarusian troops to Ukraine. Is it because he resisted Putin? I did not see any resistance, and I did not see any ask from Putin to send Belarusian troops to Ukraine. But it might be because the absolute majority of Belarusians, even the elites, even the Lukashenko's regime, is against this involvement. Why is this happening? First, is because of this consensus in Belarusian society that, well, we are against the war because we've known for centuries what the war means. Many campaigns, military campaigns, actually happened on the territory of Belarus. And second is because of this information and media work and the facts that we are still able to spread across population. So I think you asked previously why it's so important. Well, because we are effective, right, as I mentioned, but also because it absolutely impacts the situation. It impacts where we are, and it impacts the future of Belarus. So fighting is of course very very important. Overall, Putin's control over the narrative obviously not only hides what is happening, but also undermines democracy itself. And what I think is dangerous here, and I want to focus on Belarus because I think my colleagues can focus on Russia, is that we are also affected here. I keep talking about Belarus losing information sovereignty. What it means, because it sounds very abstract, it means that propaganda in Belarus copycats Russian propaganda. So all the narrative that you hear in Russia are present in Belarus. That it's not the war, it's a special military or even peacemaking operation, that this is denazification, you name it. And I hear from people in Belarus who are against Lukashenko, but they became prone, like they trusted this propaganda because they didn't have any other source of information, that actually Russians are liberating Ukraine. And imagine how it affects the future, right? When you have a neighboring country which believes in a lie, if you live in a lie, it is very dangerous, and we see where it can lead.
Hanna, that kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask Marcus, but I think it is worth noting, Hanna, it's very impressive how whatever question I throw at you, you're able to break it down into 3 points. This is one thing I'm taking away from this, is how to effectively communicate. Marcus, Hanna talked a little bit about some examples of mis and disinformation, and I wanted to ask you, as the founder of Disinfo Watch, misinformation, disinformation is a term that we're hearing a lot lately. And, sometimes when it becomes so commonplace, we don't take the time to actually think about what it actually means. And I'm wondering, drawing on your work, if you could give us a few examples of the very real examples of mis and disinformation that you're trying to combat.
Well, certainly during the past 2+ years of Russia's barbaric war against Ukraine, we've seen an intensification of disinformation, propaganda, lies that have been sort of pumped from the Russian state media through their various different influencers and proxies here in Canada at Canadians, and our understanding of that war and the conflict. One of the primary narratives that we've been hearing ever since the start of it is that Russia is engaged in a limited operation to denazify Ukraine. This is a term that has been used ever since the start of the Cold War to discredit any critic of the Russian government, but it's really intensified over the past 2 years. There have been human rights legal experts who have actually said and written about this, stating that the use of this trope, the neo-Nazi denazification trope, is actually an effort to incite hate amongst Russians towards Ukrainians. And we're seeing this narrative repeatedly used here in Canada as well by activists on the far left and far right. So that's one of the bigger narratives that we're seeing. We're also seeing over the past 5 years, Russia amplifying various different other domestic disinformation narratives on the extreme left and extreme right. During COVID, we saw Russia amplifying anti-vaccination narratives, for example. We saw Russian state media providing a platform to extremist voices during the Ottawa Freedom Convoys. These voices that were calling for the violent overthrow of Canada's democratically elected government. So Russia is extremely active inside of Canada when it comes to disinformation. Another reason why this project is very important. But I should also mention that to Canadians, at least, and that so that they understand how important information warfare is to the Kremlin domestically. Over the past 24 years that Vladimir Putin has been in power, he has basically erected an iron curtain of information around his country. As I mentioned earlier, when we've heard before that he has basically criminalized the truth. He's outlawed independent journalists because the truth and facts threaten the sort of facade that he has built of being this strong man that is protecting all Russians against foreign bogeymen, whether it's in NATO, the democratic Western world, or Ukrainian Nazis. And so the work that journalists are doing is really incredibly important in penetrating that facade and also making Russians inside Russia aware of the truth. The fact that Vladimir Putin is not that strong man, that NATO is not posing any sort of real threat to Russians, and that the regime itself is extraordinarily corrupt. So again, this project will thankfully support that work, and hopefully enable these journalists to continue exposing the corruption and the nature of the Putin regime.
Marcus, you're doing an incredible job of queuing me up for my next questions. Given everything that you just said, and you kind of touched on it at the end there, but can you say a few words about how this project will address some of the issues you discussed?
Well, again, I mean, these independent journalists, the platforms who are now primarily working in exile, thankfully in places like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and elsewhere, they are doing that frontline work of exposing the nature of the regime. And this is really a critical component. If we want to see a lasting peace in Europe, that lasting peace in Europe is only going to come without Vladimir Putin being in power. And the only way that we are going to see an end to this regime is when those democratic forces, the pro-democracy opposition, human rights organizations, civil society, are able to, when that opportunity does arise for democratic change, that they are equipped to seize it and to affect a positive change and democracy in Russia. And journalists are obviously, those independent journalists, those platforms, play a frontline role in creating those conditions and ensuring that civil society and the opposition is able to continue that work. So it's critical in that regard as well.
Thank you. Thank you for outlining the importance of this project that we're launching today. I have a couple more questions, one each for Hanna and Sabine, but then we're going to go to the audience. So start thinking of your questions now if you have questions, and we're going to give you the opportunity to ask them. But first, Hanna, I want to go back to you, because when we were in Lithuania and we met, I was very interested in some of the tactics that journalists are using to reach Belarusian audiences. And one thing I apologize again for, I was so interested in the TikTok strategy that journalists are implementing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I find it really interesting.
Of course. Right. So TikTok is not safe. You know that, right? So we know that. It's so clear. We might expect this might get censored or whatever, or might be used against us. But for now, it's effective. And as I mentioned, it's the fastest growing social media channel at this point. And both independent media and also the regime are using this at this moment. Telegram, this alternative kind of messenger that we used during the revolution of 2020, you probably heard about this, is not safe anymore because it's associated with the revolution, with protests, with the organizers of protests. So people are kind of scared to use it. YouTube is much easier, right? Instagram is also popular, but TikTok really has seen kind of this growth in the past several years in Belarus. So all, I think now, independent media have their channels, have their accounts on TikTok. What I find really interesting is, you probably remember that I mentioned these extremist labels that media outlets get. So in order to tackle this censorship, this kind of threat of people kind of using these channels that are labeled as extremist, we are creating unaffiliated TikTok channels. So imagine one outlet can have like 10, 15 channels on TikTok. It can be in both Belarusian, it can be in Russian. And people just don't know that it belongs to an extremist media outlet. And it's safe for them to check, to use it. Besides, because of algorithms, when people check one channel, one account, one platform, like outlet, they can receive more and more information about the same topic or the same kind of array of topics that they were interested in. So only benefits for now. When it comes to the reach, like one TikTok, one video that we are creating can have millions of views. And sometimes it's even more than the population of Belarus, which is 9.2 million people. So it means that we are reaching those outside Belarus as well. And when it comes to topics, of course, people prefer some kind of neutral content, something entertaining. But to be honest, I've seen examples of really politicized TikTok videos about Lukashenko, about dissidents, about political prisoners that had millions of views. So it just depends how it's done. It depends how dynamic, how really well it's done, so people can still watch it and follow and kind of want to know more about this. But again, this is not the only platform that we use. What I think is really relevant here and really important is to get people interested in this information. So if they go and watch this YouTube video, will they go and check your account or your outlet, if this is an outlet? Will they want to know more information about the topic that they just heard? I've made this research, and I've been actually conducting research inside Belarus when it comes to people's media consumption habits. And we are focusing especially on these neutral audiences, as we call them, non-users, people who do not read news. And they often say that they don't believe in news on TikTok. They don't believe that you can tell the news or analysis in just 1 minute or 30 seconds. But they say that in order to get interested in something, that they actually go on TikTok and watch something, and then they find more information about that. So this is, this is effective. But let me also mention how the regime is using it. That became really visible during the last sham elections, parliamentary and local elections in Belarus in February this year. The regime posted a series of TikToks sort of advocating, promoting the election and urging people to go and vote. And that was so creepy. So some of these videos were showing like factory workers going after some women in skirts and heels who went to voting stations. So you imagine the level. Does it appeal to people? No, it does not. But my fear is that the regime, with the money of Russia, might become more and more effective. And actually, the regime is saying that we see that independent media and kind of opposition is now using social media, so we should be more effective there as well. And another fact, the last fact, both Russia and Belarus announced the creation of a joint media holding, and they're dedicating around $11 million to this joint media holding. So you imagine that they will invest more in propaganda, and this is one of the reasons why this project that has been launched is so important, because we need resources to fight what Belarusians and the regime in Belarus and Russians are doing.
Thank you, Hanna. Really outlining a new front in the war on mis and disinformation. Sabine, I want to go to you, and then we're going to go to the audience for any questions that you have. Sabine, you made mention earlier about, I think, an important fact that I think a Canadian audience really needs to be aware of is that you mentioned that a lot of people in Latvia are preparing for what could be next after Ukraine. And that's something that we heard a lot from journalists as we prepare for this project, that they're worried about what the future holds and increased Russian military action. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you said and really educate a Canadian audience on how people are feeling in the Baltic region.
So on a daily life on the street, you wouldn't feel that. But I think after 2 years of living with this very kind of imminent threat and having a neighbor that is aggressive and that threatens and that constantly breaks rules of neighbors, we have in a way gotten used to it, but these last 2 years have been quite a challenge. Just as an example, I would mention, for example, for our safe office, we do have a plan. We do have extra food in case of a nuclear attack. We know that we have sealed ventilation. We have made preparations. We have checked bunkers. We have taken these absurd, crazy steps just so that we would feel safe and can continue on living. I mean, as much as we can control what's around us, we have made the preparations. But that has also given me a peace of mind, and I can sleep and know that, you know, if something happens, at least we have a plan. But it is quite a scary thought. But the challenge for with this thought of and with this fear or very close by threat is that we can start making policy based on fear, and that can become very dangerous, and that can also hinder democracy. for these new democracies, even in Latvia, we have regular discussions about how far you can go arguing for national security and trying to control flow of information, or closing down channels, or trying to over-regulate media, independent media. And there are certain habits from the Soviet time that are kind of close to heart and easy, but they're not effective. Censorship doesn't work. In this day and age, when information flows freely, we need to be ahead of times and kind of be more resilient. And really it means investment in education, in media literacy. And also one thing that we're very weak in this Eastern Europe part and post-Soviet space is really this emotional resilience. And not very few people are aware of ways or practice self-care, or they're so mission-driven that usually that's what causes the problems, that people work themselves into death or suicide. And so we are really trying to boost this part of missing puzzle piece. Our society has to learn how to manage our emotions. And I think COVID all over the world showed that we are unprepared emotionally for such uncertainty, and that we need to learn of new ways and new habits in order to build our emotional and mental resilience. Changing habits is very difficult, and it's a long-term thing. So it's not just education, but really how we live our lives. And a lot of people, a lot of media workers, part of my team, we made radical changes in our lives when the war started. The first staff members who came, they said they just want to do something to help stop the war and support those who have suffered tragedy due to war. And so for all of us, it has been really a lesson and a wake-up call of if we are given this limited time on Earth, how do we use that time? Can we afford to go all like workaholic and then have some negative compensators and wine and in the evening? So it's hard work, because changing our habits is very difficult. But in order to be resilient, to stay strong and not to give up, and to maintain joy in our lives, we really have to be very aware of how we live and what decisions we make. And it's easier for us to do it when we're in a community, because when one falls, the others help out. When I get upset or start crying, then somebody walks up in the kitchen and gives me a hug. And so we keep each other strong. No. But it is indeed, Bill. I never thought in my life that I will be in this situation, and I love my country. And yes, we also get fearful, but really courage is about taking action despite fear, right? So.
This is a very beautiful answer, Sabine. I appreciate what you said about we have limited time here, and I think that's what makes the journalists who are at the front of this fight that much more impressive. The staff, the 50 staff that Journalists for Human Rights has across the world who dedicate their professional lives to moving these issues forward, and that's why I think we're so excited to start this project and show Canadian support for the journalists who are most affected and most impacted by some of this, like not only misinformation, but violence and attacks and a whole reality that I think we're beginning to understand here in Canada. At this point, if there's any questions from the audience, I think we're going to have a microphone. If there's any questions from the audience, anything? I think we've got one over here, and I know we're in a small room, but there are people joining online. So if you could speak into the microphone so they can hear as well, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. Can you all hear me? Thank you very much for all your comments. And Hanna, it was really interesting to hear about how TikTok is used to draw in people who aren't necessarily politically engaged and active, but to just draw them in and then drive them towards looking up more information. And my question is, how do you combat, it's important to combat disinformation, of course, but how do you also combat news fatigue? Especially in a place like Canada, for instance, where learning more about what's happening in Russia or in Belarus and other places might not be as immediate for people, but is still important, as you've pointed out, Marcus, in terms of defending our own democracy here and doing that for other countries too. So how do you kind of bring that immediacy, or how do you draw that interest for people in Canada? And I'm looking at you, Marcus, because you're here, but really for anyone.
I mean, I can quickly give some thoughts here. I mean, one of the parts of this project, one aspect of it is to actually connect these journalists like Hanna and others in the Russian journalist community with Canadian media, and to try and get some of that information that they're reporting on, which is really, I think, as far as detail goes, far more interesting than sort of maybe some of the more general reporting that we see on what's happening inside Russia and inside Belarus. And so that's one of the goals of the project, is to bring that information over here, contextualize it, and sort of give it some relevance to a Canadian audience. As far as news fatigue goes, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I think all of us, even within our own peer groups, probably have experienced that. Where most people are tired of the entire world seems to be blowing up and burning down at the same time. And so trying to, I think, work with, when it comes to disinformation, working with newsrooms, editorial staff, making sure that they have the right information, pre-bunking Russian disinformation that is coming into Canada. I mean, half the time we can anticipate where they're going to strike next, because it's always those sort of very sensitive, polarizing potential issues that they do target. And so we know that they're doing this. So again, going to those newsrooms, making sure that everyone is aware of what might be coming so that they can anticipate it and report on it in the right way. And the other point is looking to the Baltic states and to look at how they've built resilience within their own societies. They've had a lot of experience with Russian disinformation over the past pretty much century. And so learning from them, learning from the Finns, the Swedes, who have all dealt with this, they're doing it very effectively. And so I think that we should be looking to them as to how we build that resilience here in Canada.
Thank you, Marcus. Any other questions? Yeah, we've got another question.
Thank you very much for this. Marcus, you just mentioned connecting journalists with Canadian journalists is one goal. But I was wondering, we talked a lot about supporting these journalists. It came up a couple of times during this conversation. What does a tangible support look like for us here, for people listening? What really is, how can we support these journalists?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our project is looking at some pretty wide ranging ways of supporting these journalists. It starts with training new journalists who are just sort of coming into the field, but also training experienced journalists on how to use the platforms that Hanna outlined, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, how to develop their narratives, how they tell those stories is one of the aspects of the training that we'll be looking at. But also personal safety. We've seen these attacks on journalists rise. We just saw Leonid Volkov about a month and a half ago, who worked with Alexei Navalny. I mean, he was in Vilnius and he was attacked outside of his home with a group of thugs that basically were wielding a hammer. And this was intended to both intimidate him and other journalists. So, personal safety is a big issue, and also dealing with digital transnational repression, both on the cyber side of things, but also, the psychological defense. When you are living in these communities, as Sabine has clearly outlined, I mean, there is a cost, psychological cost, and a toll to all of this. And so what we're going to try and do is figure out ways that we can support these journalists in terms of that sort of psychological and emotional resilience. And then there's the other side of the project, which will be looking at supporting the production of content, whether it's maybe investigative series, videos on YouTube, podcasts. There's a whole range of content that we're going to be supporting over the next 18 months. So it's really those two sides that we're looking at.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, if there are any. Otherwise, we can move to some closing remarks from our panelists, and perhaps we'll go in reverse order and start with Sabine for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I was really surprised in how this pressure or expectations that we have from the exile community that they will be this critical element in ending the war. That it's indeed a lot of pressure on a group of people, and a lot of media that initially were established as, the positive media, positive news media, or the youth media. A lot of them have become fully news media. And only in these last recent months, we finally see some new initiatives of satire or some other elements of covering other parts of life coming into the media. But in Europe, there's so much expectation from the exile community that they feel like they can't afford to focus on other issues except for war. And one interesting fact that I learned with one of the media that we support and work with, they specialize in podcasts, and they are spread out. They have approximately 16 or more products. Some focus on history, some focus on education or child rearing. And even just the wisdom and creativity they have to get to the essence of underlying issues for war through these other topics. For example, just after the war, one of the top podcasts in Moscow was about sexual abuse in schools in this talented children's program, youth program. And through the comments of the podcast, the society was linking the aggression of Russian soldiers abroad to this kind of violence and this abuse that they have experienced in the society. And but interestingly enough, that their podcast inspired a similar podcast collaboration between media in Latvia. And so the exile community has actually also filled up gaps in our media field and is reaching not just a Russian audience, but also a Russian-speaking audience here in Latvia. So this synergy that happens when you have professionals joining and working together, it is beautiful. It creates something new and fills in gaps, and you can support each other. And it will be very interesting to have also this collaboration with Canadian professionals and colleagues. But indeed, it is not about geographical boundaries, but the fact, what makes us stronger is that we are able to work together. And even when Marcus and colleagues came to visit us, just their visit, just the ability to share what we're going through, it already felt like a lot of support. Just the fact that someone else is thinking about us and caring, it means a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabine, and thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues do at the Media Riga at the Riga Media Hub, and we're very excited to work with you on this project as we launch it today. Let's pivot to Hanna for some closing remarks.
I have a fatigue of fatigue. We keep talking about how we are tired, and it's been several years already, and the news are repeating. Of course, as a journalist, I also know how the news cycle works, but at the same time, there are so many stories, right? Belarus is such an undiscovered and undercovered country that wherever you go, whatever topic you write about, it might be interesting. And I'm not exaggerating. For example, did you know that the president of the Belarusian People's Republic, the oldest government in exile in the world, lives in Canada? Her name is Ivonka Survila. That's a very interesting topic. As another example, in 2022, when the full-scale invasion started, 30,000 people monitored the movement of Russian troops, every step on Russian soldiers on Belarusian soil, and reported to the initiative called Belaruski Rayon. That was probably also undercovered, and this shows, many people are asking, where is the resistance, where are the protests, there are no pictures, what can we show? People have given up. Well, they haven't, and they actually pay dearly for sharing information. A few days ago, there was a man who was sentenced to 9 years for leaking information about officials. We, Belarusian media, are very creative, and we cover many topics, which might also serve as an example for, I think, other countries. While we cannot sometimes focus on politics because we want to reach those neutral audiences, we can cover cuisine. And then we explain the history of Belarus through this cuisine, because what the regime is doing, they're Russifying the country. They are talking about the Soviet and Russian empires past of Belarus, but they are not talking about the previous centuries, that when we were with Poland and Lithuania. So we are doing this through these kind of neutral topics about cuisine, basically recipes. The topic of culture is very interesting. As you might know, we have a language issue in Belarus. We have 2 official languages. Russian is most prevalent. But what people are doing now, because there is no open resistance, they cannot protest, but they're going to this very cultural sort of exhibitions or events about culture, where they talk about the language, about our past, whatever. So all of these topics are not covered, I assume, in international media, and there are many things that Belarusian journalists can share and how they can get the Canadian and global audience interested in the topics from inside the country. And I believe that it's the quality of information and stories that is relevant, not the fatigue or the lack of it.
Thank you very much, Hanna. We appreciate that, and hopefully through this project we can educate Canadians about all the stories that are coming out of Belarus. And now over to Marcus for some closing remarks.
Well, sure. I mean, I think that we could enlighten Canadians about some of the positive things that are happening inside Belarus, inside of Russia, but also some of the negative things that are happening there. And also to advance democratic values in those countries. I mean, there is a clear lack of information, for example, about the fact that the LGBTQ community within Russia has now been completely outlawed. They've been labeled as a terrorist organization. This is an entire community. There's very little reporting inside of Russia about this. There's also very little reporting in Canada about this problem as well, and various other aspects, whether it's transparency, corruption within Russia, reporting inside of Russia, reporting on that outside of Russia as well. But ultimately, with this project, I think that Canadians can be very, very proud of it. We are moving on to an offensive posture when it comes to promoting facts and truth. We're not countering Russian disinformation with more disinformation. We are using facts and truth to counter it. So this is something that I think as Canadians we should be very, very proud of. And I hope that we continue this work, because that is the only way that we are going to challenge and address this rising authoritarianism, whether it's Lukashenko regime, Putin, or otherwise.
Thank you, Marcus. And before I pass it back to Janine, I just want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. I think through this discussion, we've kind of outlined the challenges ahead, but I think through the partnerships with Sabine and Hanna and other journalists and their colleagues and Marcus, we're really going to attack this issue. And we're very excited to be launching it today. I also want to thank all of you who joined here in person and online. And I think whenever you're dealing with technology these days, there's always rolling the dice, but everything worked perfectly today. So I think we need to give Joe and his team a shout out, a well-deserved shout out. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Janine.
Yeah, thank you all in the audience for being here, and please check our soon-to-be new website. Follow and like JHR on social media, and we will share the updates on this project and our other projects as well, working in many of the same issues in other parts of the world. Thank you so much to Hanna and Sabine, and looking so much forward to work with you on this. Really liked your remark, Hanna, on I'm fatigued with the fatigue. We will keep that one going. So thank you all. And thank you to Massey College for hosting us.